I always thought the vastness of the desert would calm me. It's what I needed after everything that had happened at work. The constant pressure, the unrelenting deadlines, the suffocating feeling of being boxed into the same routine. I planned the trip to Big Bend National Park months ago, thinking a week away from it all would clear my head. Solitude in the desert seemed like the perfect way to hit the reset button. I'd heard the stories, of course, rumors of spiritual significance, whispered legends passed down by native tribes, but I'd never put much stock in that kind of thing. They were just stories, right? I was wrong. Big Bend is a place where the land meets the sky in such a dramatic way that it's almost unnerving. The sun bakes the earth by day, and at night the stars stretch endlessly, a canopy of light over the barren landscape. The silence is deafening, and out here, far away from everything, it feels like the world is holding its breath. I arrived at the park late in the afternoon, the sun already beginning to dip behind the distant Chisos Mountains. My plan was simple: hike the trail to the window, a spot famous for its breathtaking sunset views. I'd set up camp, spend the night there, and continue deeper into the wilderness the next day. A week alone, away from the noise of civilization. I'd been craving. Everything seemed perfect at first. The air was dry and warm, the trail rugged but manageable, and my gear was top-notch, a mix of high-end camping equipment and essentials I'd collected over the years. I felt prepared, confident, ready to let the desert cleanse my mind. But that feeling didn't last. By the time I reached my campsite, I noticed my GPS was flickering, the signal coming and going without explanation. I chalked it up to a glitch. Maybe the battery was low, though I had checked it before I left. Then my phone started to act strange. The battery, which had been at 80% when I arrived, drained rapidly, dropping to 20% in just a few minutes. No big deal, I thought. I wasn't here to use my phone. After all, this was supposed to be my escape from technology. As I set up my tent, the sun dipped below the horizon and the cold wind swept through the canyon. I hadn't expected the temperature to drop so quickly, and I fumbled through my pack for my jacket. My hands were shaking, and I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or something else. That's when I heard it. The first sign that something wasn't right. It was faint at first, just a whisper carried on the wind, so soft I thought I imagined it. But then it came again, rhythmic, almost like chanting, echoing through the canyon. I paused, holding my breath, straining to hear. There was nothing, just the sound of the wind. "Get it together, Tyler," I muttered to myself. I was overthinking things again. The wind through the rocks, that's all it was. My mind playing tricks on me, feeding into my anxieties like it always did. I finished setting up camp and tried to relax, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. The silence was oppressive, heavy, as if the desert itself was waiting for something. I tried to brush it off. I was just tired, exhausted, really. That night, as I lay in my tent, the whispers returned, louder this time, clearer. It wasn't the wind. It was something else, something real. The whispers grew, surrounding me, coming from every direction. They weren't in English, not even Spanish. It was an ancient language, guttural and rhythmic, like a chant I couldn't understand. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my heart racing. I reached for my flashlight, but when I clicked it on, the beam sputtered and died. My hands fumbled in the darkness, searching for my backup lantern. When I found it, I clicked it on, flooding the tent with light. But the whispers didn't stop. They only seemed to get closer. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just my imagination but deep down, I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just anxiety. Something was out there. I stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face. The fire I'd built earlier had long since died down to embers. I looked around, scanning the landscape with my lantern. That's when I saw it. The small stone cairns, dozens of them, scattered around the edges of my campsite like tiny tombstones. They hadn't been there when I set up camp. I was sure of it. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been here. Or something. My mind raced. Could it have been other hikers? A prank, maybe? But the trail had been empty when I arrived, and this was an isolated spot. No one would have come this far just to mess with me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. My hands were shaking as I backed toward my tent, the beam of my lantern swinging wildly across the ground. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. A shadow just at the edge of the light, darting between the rocks. It was too fast to be human. My heart pounded in my chest as I swung the lantern around, trying to catch another glimpse, but there was nothing. Just the empty desert. I bolted back into my tent, zipping it shut behind me, as if that thin layer of nylon could protect me from whatever was out there. I sat there, gripping the lantern, listening to the whispers fade into the distance. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise made my heart jump. Every gust of wind felt like something moving just outside. By morning, the whispers were gone, but the unease lingered. I packed up camp, deciding to cut my trip short. I'd head back to the trailhead, call it a failure, and go home. There was no shame in that. But as I started hiking back, something was off. The trail didn't look right. The landmarks, the rock formations, they weren't where they should have been. I pulled out my map, trying to orient myself, but nothing matched. It was like the land itself had shifted overnight. I checked my GPS, but the screen was blank. Dead. My phone, too, had lost all power. Panic set in. I was lost, completely, utterly lost, in the middle of the desert. I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe. I could find my way back. I just retraced my steps. But no matter how far I walked, the landscape seemed to warp around me, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. My footprints, which should have been visible in the sand, were gone, erased, as if I'd never walked that way at all. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on me, but the cold from the night before hadn't left. It clung to me, seeping into my bones. And then I saw it again, the shadow. It was farther away this time, just a dark figure standing on the ridge, watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was tall, impossibly tall and thin. I couldn't make out any features, just its silhouette against the sky. It didn't move. It didn't come closer. It just stood there, watching. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to get away from it. I turned and ran, my legs burning as I scrambled over the rocks, my pack bouncing against my back. But no matter how far I ran, the figure was always there. Always just at the edge of my vision, standing still, waiting. My mind raced with the legends I'd read before the trip, stories of La Malahora, the evil hour, a spirit that lured travelers to their doom. It was said to appear just before tragedy struck, a warning of death. I hadn't believed in those stories, not really. But now, with the shadows stalking me, I wasn't so sure. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert. I was exhausted, my body aching, my mind frayed. I couldn't keep running. I had to face it. I stopped, turning to look at the ridge behind me. The shadow was closer now, standing still, its dark form blending with the rocks. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I'm not afraid," I said aloud, though my voice wavered. "I'm not afraid of you." The shadow didn't move, but I felt its presence, heavy and oppressive, weighing down on me. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stand my ground. Slowly, the figure began to fade, dissolving into the landscape like smoke. The whispers, too, faded into the wind, growing quieter until they were gone. I stood there for a long time, the desert silent once more. The sky darkened above me. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay here any longer. The next morning, I found the trail. The landscape had returned to normal, the landmarks in the right places, as if nothing had changed. I made my way back to the trailhead, my legs weak, my mind still spinning from the encounter. I left Big Bend that day, never to return. Some people might say it was just my imagination, that the isolation and the anxiety had gotten to me, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The desert is a place of mystery, a place where the veil between worlds is thin, and sometimes something crosses over. Several months ago, I decided to go road tripping through California after I was laid off due to the recent pandemic. Fortunately for me, I had some money saved up and was able to buy myself a small but practical RV, which included a kitchen, a bathroom, and a large, comfortable bed. Anyway, It had always been a dream of mine to visit the national parks in the US. After reading the book Missing 4111, my first destination was going to be Yosemite National Park, where I had planned on staying for the whole month with my two huskies in order to conduct my own investigation into several high-profile missing person cases for a book I was writing. I had 41 more miles to go before reaching Yosemite, so I decided to find a place where I could park my RV for the night. I was getting pretty tired and was in desperate need of sleep. I drove around for an hour or so before I finally found a spot right next to a very secluded beach along the Pacific Coast Highway, which was not on the map where I parked my RV. I was used to stealth camping, especially at night, as I had done it several times before in order to save money. And being a female, I always took precautions while traveling solo. I always carried a weapon of some sort with me, just in case I encountered some crazy person on the road. Anyway, it was around 10 at night when I decided to take a walk along the beach in order to stretch my legs before going to bed. I grabbed my flashlight and my two huskies, then set off for the beach. Even with my flashlight on, though, everything around me was still pitch black. Walking along the edge of the beach, I could hear the waves crashing against the rocks that littered the shoreline. As I continued my walk on the beach, I tripped on something, nearly falling face first into the sand. Pointing my flashlight down, I noticed a tattered sleeping bag and various other camping gear scattered along the beach. "What the hell?" I asked out loud. Just then, I heard a woman's voice calling me from the water, followed by a loud splash, causing both of my dogs to start growling. "What is it, girls?" I asked my dogs. I pointed my flashlight in the direction of the splash, and that's when I saw something bobbing up and down in the water. The voice continued to call, having a sort of weird hypnotic effect on me. My instincts immediately kicked in when I realized it was a person. Well, not exactly. I removed my shoes and quickly jumped in. As I swam toward the figure, I could hear Daisy and Violet barking near the shoreline. I could still see the figure as I approached it, but something felt off, and I instinctively clutched at the pocket knife that I kept in my bra. Then, all of a sudden, I heard an ear-piercing scream, reminding me of a mountain lion. This stopped me dead in my tracks, and I quickly turned around and swam breathlessly back to shore. A few seconds later, when I looked back again, I noticed the figure was now gone. Just then, I felt something grab my leg, pulling me underwater and causing searing pain throughout my whole body. The hand was green and gnarled with extremely long nails that reminded me of talons. Fear kicked in as I tried to kick whatever it was that grabbed my leg. Then I remembered my pocket knife. I reached for it inside my bra and brought it down hard on the creature's hand. It let out a blood-curdling scream before finally releasing my leg. Once again, I swam back to shore, where Daisy and Violet were still barking. When I was safely out of the water, I grabbed my two dogs and quickly ran back to my RV. I locked the door, then jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine. But when I turned on the headlights, I nearly puked, because there were hundreds of glowing red eyes in the water. Needless to say, I didn't stick around long. I've been living in a van for 15 years, and this is how it became the end of it. This is a true story of mine. Believe it or not, it's up to you. In 2016, I traveled throughout California, and I enjoyed every bit of it. I work online using my laptop so I can work everywhere I go, and I have saved up tons of money during the past few years. I wanted to sell my van and get a big RV, but I realized everything I need is a perfect fit for my van and doesn't really need an upgrade. Every day, I'd go find a small, peaceful spot and sit back and relax while watching Netflix. Every Friday, I would go to a campground to fish and treat myself to a 6-pack of beer. One summer Friday, I went to a grocery store and bought some snacks and a 6-pack to go and chill at the campground. It takes me 4 hours to get to the campground. When you get there, you'll have to drive for 30 minutes on a dirt road to get to the spot where I want to stay. I've visited this location several times and enjoy the surroundings. When I arrived, I unpacked my food and set up a folding table so that I could enjoy cooking my catch after fishing. I got my fishing pole and my six-pack and walked to a lake that was a 10-minute walk from my van. I got to the peaceful lake and saw that there was a huge fallen tree that wasn't there before. I didn't really take a close look at the huge fallen tree. Took off my backpack and sat on the tree. Then I started to set up my fishing pole and hook the bait on it. I was sitting on that big tree, and to my horror, the tree or thing I was sitting on moved and I fell back. Then I got up and looked. I took a closer look, and it wasn't a fallen tree. It had some big scales and moved like an anaconda, but it was nothing close to an anaconda. My guess is that it was more than 20 feet long and around 2 feet wide. It turned its head to look at me, and it had big sharp teeth and 2 large horns on its head. It stared at me for a good 5 seconds before it slowly crawled into the lake. I was freaked out and left all my stuff, running back to my van. I locked all the doors and windows. I was shaking and thinking, what the hell did I just see? I didn't get out of the van because it was almost dark by then. I put on soft music so I wouldn't think of that thing. When I closed my eyes, I saw those sharp teeth with the horns on the creature's head. At 3:30 a.m., I woke up to a sound. It sounded like someone was splashing water on my van. I got up and pulled out my pistol from under my bed. I slowly peered out the window and saw nothing, but I started to feel my van shake like crazy. I looked around and still saw nothing, but when I put my flashlight to the ground, I saw that creature again with big scales like fish scales. I went to look out the other window and realized that the thing had wrapped around my van, and that was why it kept shaking. I shut the curtain after seeing a huge face with a large horn appear in my window. Through the night, I covered myself under my blanket and cried, praying to God and wishing it would go away. That creature splashed water and shook my van until the sunlight came up. When it finally stopped, I started my van and sped off, leaving my table and other stuff behind. I was shaking like crazy on the way out of the forest. I finally got to town and stayed overnight at a Walmart parking lot. Ever since then, I've stopped living in a van and am now living in an apartment. That's a true story that happened to me. Please comment below this video, Horror Life Media here, and let me know if any of you guys have ever encountered something like this. To this day, I'm still trying to find the answer to what that thing is. I parked my RV deep in the Black Hills, farther than I'd ever dared to go before. The last sign of civilization had been a gas station over an hour back, and now it was just me, the trees, and the silence. And that was exactly what I wanted. Solitude. After the divorce, I craved it like a drug. I needed this trip to remind myself of who I used to be before the arguments, before the failures, before the loneliness settled in like a slow-burning rod. Out here, surrounded by miles of forest, I'd find peace. At least that's what I told myself as I killed the engine, the sudden quiet swallowing me whole. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, breathing in the sharp, cold air. The Black Hills were breathtaking, tall, ancient pines rising like sentinels against the darkening sky. The wind was still, not even a rustle of leaves, just silence. I walked around the clearing, feeling the weight of the world lift ever so slightly with each step. This was why I loved the wilderness, the isolation, the escape. But there was something off this time, a heaviness in the air. I'd been here before, years ago, but it had never felt like this. I shook off the feeling. My mind was playing tricks on me. It had been a rough few months, and I wasn't thinking straight. A couple of nights out here would fix that. I busied myself with setting up camp, though I didn't have much to do. The RV had everything I needed. I lit a fire outside anyway, for old time's sake, and poured myself a drink. I sat on the fold-out chair and stared into the flames, letting the warmth pull me in. Then I heard it. A sound, faint at first, like tapping. I looked around, but there was nothing. Probably just the forest settling. I turned back to the fire, trying to relax, but the noise came again, rhythmic, deliberate this time. I couldn't shake it off. Animals, I muttered to myself, standing up and shining my flashlight into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dense undergrowth. I scanned the edge of the forest, expecting to see a raccoon or a deer. But there was nothing, just the trees, standing tall, unmoving. I took a deep breath and laughed. I was being paranoid. The first night alone always did this to me, made me jump at shadows. I headed back into the RV, locking the door behind me. That night, I slept fitfully. Dreams of my ex-wife drifted through my mind, her face twisted in anger, her voice echoing in that same sharp, accusing tone I knew too well. I woke up several times, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. By morning, the feeling of unease still clung to me like a damp fog. I tried to ignore it, pushing myself to enjoy the day. I spent the morning hiking, trying to lose myself in the familiar sights of the Black Hills, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods felt off, too quiet, too still. I returned to the RV just after midday, planning to settle in and enjoy a lazy afternoon. That's when the real problems began. The generator sputtered and died as I tried to start it up. I cursed, fiddling with the switch, but nothing happened. No power, no lights, and no heat. I wasn't worried yet. I could figure it out, I always did, but the frustration simmered beneath the surface. I was already on edge, and the last thing I needed was for the RV to start malfunctioning. I grabbed my toolkit and went outside, working on the generator for what felt like hours. As I crouched next to the RV, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, wrench in hand, listening. There it was again. Soft, slow steps, like someone was circling me. I whipped around, but the forest was empty, just the same dense pines standing silent, watching. "Get it together, Jack," I muttered, turning back to the generator. By dusk, I was back inside. The generator was still dead, and the RV was cold, but I told myself it was fine. I'd built a fire outside, so I didn't need heat in here. I sat by the fire again, staring out into the forest, hoping the flames would chase away the anxiety that had been building all day. That's when I saw them. Shadows, just at the edge of the firelight. They were tall, thin, humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too elongated, too stiff. They stood between the trees, unmoving, watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I blinked, thinking I was imagining things, but they didn't disappear. They were still there, standing in the shadows just beyond the fire. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. No response. The figures remained still, their hollow eyes fixed on me. I stood up slowly, grabbing the flashlight and shining it toward them, but the beam seemed to bounce off the darkness, unable to penetrate the trees. When I lowered the light, they were gone. I stumbled back into the RV, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I paced the small space, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone followed me out here? Were they messing with me? I grabbed my phone, only to find the battery drained. Dead. The same with my watch. I was completely cut off. I tried to calm myself down, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I felt like I was being watched, even inside the RV. I peeked out the window, expecting to see those figures again, but the clearing was empty. The fire outside was still burning, casting flickering shadows across the ground. I crawled into bed, wrapping myself in blankets to ward off the chill that had settled in. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was jumping at shadows because of the divorce, because of the loneliness. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I barely slept that night, and when I did, my dreams were filled with strange voices, whispers that sounded like my ex-wife, but hollow, distorted. She called to me from the darkness, telling me to come outside to follow her into the trees. When I woke, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. It was morning, but the RV was still freezing. I could see my breath fogging in the air. I had to leave. Something was wrong here, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out what. I threw my things together, ready to get the hell out of the Black Hills, but when I tried the engine, the RV wouldn't start. No matter how many times I turned the key, it sputtered and died. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, panic rising in my chest. I grabbed my bag and rushed outside, but as soon as I stepped into the clearing, I froze. They were back. The figures, tall, hollow-eyed shadows, stood at the tree line surrounding the clearing. Dozens of them now, all watching me, waiting. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The fire had burned out during the night, and the clearing was shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog. I had to get out of here. The figures didn't move as I grabbed my camping knife and marched toward the nearest tree, determined to hack my way out of this nightmare. I had seen strange carvings on some of the trees, symbols, jagged and twisted. Maybe they had something to do with this, something to do with the figures. With trembling hands, I drove the blade into the bark, carving through the strange lines. As soon as I broke the symbol, the air shifted. The shadows flickered by, and for a moment I thought I heard a low, echoing wail. I didn't stop. I hacked at the trees, cutting through every symbol I could find. The voices in my head grew louder with each slash. My ex-wife's voice, distorted and hollow, begged me to stop, telling me to come into the forest, to let go. But I didn't listen. I couldn't. Finally, when I had cut through the last symbol, the air went still. The figures at the tree line melted away, dissolving into the fog. I stumbled back to the RV, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The engine roared to life on the first try. I sped out of the clearing, not daring to look back. The Black Hills vanished behind me, swallowed by the fog. But even now, as I write this, I can still feel them watching, waiting. The hollow ones never really let you go. My name is Mark Norman, and this happened back in 2014 when I was living off the grid a few miles northeast of the Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado. Just me in a secondhand Airstream trailer parked behind a stand of skinny pines. I'd chosen that spot because the dunes made for a strange but beautiful backdrop. And I'd saved enough to quit my construction job for a few months, settle out here, and live off the land. I liked starting my mornings with a cheap instant coffee on the small wooden steps I'd built outside the trailer door. The ground around me was mostly dry soil scattered with sagebrush. Wind rattled the old stovepipe on the roof, and at night, the stars were so big and bright they made me feel like I'd left the world behind. I remember it was early May, the days growing longer and warmer. I'd run low on supplies, canned beans, oatmeal packets, some jerky, so I planned a short trip into town. I recall hitching a small backpack over my shoulder and locking the trailer more from habit than need. I hardly expected thieves out here. The trail toward the gravel road took me through a scraggly patch of brush, and I almost tripped over a loose branch. I paused at the scent of something off in the air. It reminded me of old meat left too long in a broken fridge. I dismissed it at first. Out here, sometimes you found a dead animal, maybe a rabbit or a bird that got torn apart by a coyote. I kept walking. About an hour later, I reached the main gravel road. A pickup rolled by, tires kicking up dust, and I thumbed a ride. The driver was a wiry guy with large sunglasses and a beard braided into a short tail. He said his name was Ari and that he'd come out here looking for an old friend who ran a campsite somewhere near the dunes. He asked if I'd seen anyone, and I said not really. It was quiet. Ari shrugged and kept driving. We chatted about the weather and how tough it was to be self-sufficient in a place like this. I liked his laugh, short, barking, genuine. We got to town, a tiny place with one gas station, a small grocery store, and a dusty hardware shop. I picked up supplies, canned tuna, a pack of tortillas, some dried fruit, and coffee. I also grabbed a cheap bottle of whiskey because things had grown a bit lonely, and I figured a little nip might help me sleep. That evening, Ari gave me a ride back up the gravel road. I thanked him and hopped off near my trail. He said, "Good luck out there," and rolled away into the twilight. As I walked back, I noticed a deeper quiet than usual. There's a difference between natural quiet and that odd hush that makes you uneasy. I reached the spot where I'd smelled something foul that morning and paused. The scent was stronger now. The wind had died and I heard no birds. I moved through the brush and discovered a body lying face down on the ground, half hidden by weeds. My gut clenched. The man wore dusty jeans and a flannel shirt. He looked about my age, Late 20s, maybe. Flies hovered around his neck and his hair. I stepped back, heart pounding. I dropped my grocery bag and stood there, stunned. I'm no hero, but I couldn't just leave him. Still, I was scared. I didn't see any weapon, but there was blood dried into the dirt. His left arm stuck out at a weird angle. I forced myself to kneel and check his pockets. No wallet, no phone, just a scrap of paper with a few numbers scrawled on it. I didn't recognize them. My hands shook. I whispered something like, holy hell, and then I thought about going to town, telling the sheriff or whoever handled these things, but I'd just come back, and it was getting dark. I decided to hurry home, lock myself in, and first thing in the morning, I'd make the 2-hour trek out and report this. I scooped up my groceries and ran. I barely slept that night. I sat in my trailer's cramped interior, a lantern flickering against the aluminum walls. My Airstream looked cozy enough, my bed in the back, a tiny table, a propane stove, but every shadow outside set my nerves on edge. Around midnight, I took a sip of whiskey and tried to calm down. I wondered who the dead man was and what had happened. Maybe he'd fallen and hit his head, but the blood looked deliberate. This didn't feel like an accident. At dawn, I headed out again. I walked fast toward the gravel road, determined to flag down anyone with a car. After half an hour, I spotted footprints in the dust beside the trail. They looked fresh. Whoever made them wore heavy boots with a pattern of hex shapes on the soles. They trailed off toward where the corpse lay. I didn't dare follow them. Instead, I picked up my pace. My heart thrummed in my ears. About halfway to the road, I heard footsteps behind me. I froze and looked back. Someone stood about 50 yards away, a tall figure wearing old green military pants and a brown jacket. He had a shaved head and a face so thin it looked like a skull with skin stretched too tight. He stared at me. I called out, "Hey, who's there?" No answer. He started walking toward me, slow and steady. I weighed my options. Running didn't seem right, but standing still felt even worse. I turned and quickened my steps. I didn't sprint because I wanted to pace myself. A few minutes later, I glanced over my shoulder. He was still behind me, closing in. I tried to stay calm. The trail narrowed between some brush. Suddenly, he rushed forward, closing the gap. I could see his face clearly now, dry, cracked lips, a shallow scar on his left cheek. He had a lean, wiry build and eyes that never blinked. He didn't say a word. He just raised something shiny, a long, thin blade. I yelled, "Hold on, man. Talk." He shook his head and kept moving. I had nothing but a folding pocket knife. The brush was too thick to run through easily. He rushed at me, swinging low. I jumped back, stumbled, and nearly fell. "Why?" I shouted. He just grunted. He slashed at my arm and I jerked away. The blade grazed my forearm. I hissed in pain. I couldn't stop him. He had every advantage. So I backed away, careful, step by step, trying to keep my distance. I thought if I made it to the gravel road, maybe a car would pass, or I could at least run down the open stretch. But he wouldn't let me escape easily. I heard a distant engine. The man froze, looked toward the road. I seized the moment, darting off along a shallow ditch. He sprinted after me. I tripped over a rock and tumbled down, scraping my knees. He closed the distance fast, so I kicked dirt at his face. He snarled, wiped it away, and tried to stab my thigh. I rolled aside, screaming, "Stop!" He didn't. His silence scared me more than anything. It was as if he was on a mission and words were useless. I managed to scramble to my feet and run toward a small cluster of low bushes. I spotted a white truck idling on the gravel road about 50 yards away. A tall woman stood near it, checking a map on her phone. I yelled, "Help!" at the top of my lungs. The attacker flinched. He must have realized he'd lose if witnesses showed up. He backed off, glared at me, and then ran in the opposite direction, disappearing behind a rise of sandy earth. I reached the woman and gasped out what had happened. She looked horrified. Her name was Carla, a traveler on her way to meet friends. She told me to get in the truck, and we drove straight into town. At the sheriff's office, I told them everything. A deputy with tired eyes and a crooked nose listened. He said he'd get a team out there. Hours passed. I sat in a stiff chair, my arm throbbing under a bandage I'd improvised with a strip of cloth. They brought in Ari, too, the guy who'd given me a ride, to check if he'd seen anything suspicious. He hadn't. I ended up in a small motel near the edge of town that night, a single dusty room with a lumpy mattress and a TV that only got static. I didn't sleep much. Next morning, a young deputy named Marcus took me back out. They had found the dead body. Marcus told me they'd found another body, too, a woman who'd gone camping a few miles away. My stomach turned sour. I asked if they knew who was responsible. Marcus said not yet, but they had a lead. They believed it was some drifter. While we talked, we stood near my trailer. I realized I didn't want to stay out here anymore. The quiet and the emptiness felt different now. Tainted. While Marcus stepped aside to answer a radio call, I packed a few essentials. I'd leave my Airstream for now and fetch it later with a friend's help. I didn't want to be alone out here another night. As I leaned against the trailer, Carla showed up. She'd volunteered to stick around since she'd witnessed my panic. She offered me a lift back into town. I nodded. Just as we were leaving, a local rancher pulled up on an ATV. He said his name was Bud and he'd heard about the murders. Bud was older, with leathery skin and a wide-brimmed hat. He spoke softly. They think it might be a fellow named Brian Maxwell, used to work construction in the region. Turned bad after losing a job and started robbing folks camping near the dunes. Bud looked off into the distance. They say he's been squatting in old shacks, picking off drifters for their supplies. I swallowed hard. Brian Maxwell. The name meant nothing to me before, but now it's stuck in my head like a splinter. Bud said Brian had been desperate, angry at anyone who managed to live free without stumbling. Maybe jealous of people going off-grid and surviving where he'd failed. Bud had heard the story from another rancher who talked to a deputy that morning. Carla and I drove away. I looked out the window, my arms still throbbing, my head buzzing with images of that lean man and his blade. I kept thinking about how close I'd come to dying. The dunes shimmered in the distance, innocent and bright, holding secrets I never cared to learn. I would leave this place. But in my gut, I knew someone like Brian Maxwell could be anywhere, anytime. That made my skin crawl worse than anything else. And as we hit the highway, I caught myself staring into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that gaunt face again, silent and intent. I didn't, but it didn't matter. The feeling stayed with me. I should have known something was wrong the second I stepped out of the RV. The forest around me felt too still, the kind of stillness that makes you question whether the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But I brushed it off. I was in the middle of the Sawtooth National Forest, miles from any other campers or hikers. This was exactly what I wanted, complete isolation. This place was going to make for the perfect series on my channel. Unmarked trails. I'd call it a deep dive into forgotten paths, places people were too afraid to explore. And this one, it had all the elements of a viral video. No one knew much about the unmarked trail I was hunting, only vague rumors of hikers disappearing and whispered stories of something called The Collector. Something about that name intrigued me. I wasn't one to believe in folklore or ghost stories, but my audience loved them, and that's what mattered. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. I hiked, filmed B-roll footage, and narrated into my camera about the history of the area. The trail I was following wasn't exactly easy to find. I had to rely on a few tips from locals, a vague map sketched by a guide at a general store, and a lot of guesswork. But I found it, an overgrown path cutting into the forest, almost hidden by the surrounding brush. Perfect. This is it, I said into the camera, feeling the excitement bubble up. The forgotten trail. I spent that afternoon hiking along it, deeper into the wilderness than I'd planned. Time got away from me, but the sun was still up, casting golden light through the canopy. I knew I had to head back to camp soon, but the trail kept pulling me further. I wanted more footage, more content for the channel. By the time I returned to my RV, dusk was settling in. I set my gear down, sat by the fire I'd built earlier, and reviewed the footage. That's when I noticed it. In the background of one of my shots, there was something. a figure standing just at the edge of the trees. It was faint, barely visible, but definitely there. A tall, shadowy outline watching me. I rewound the clip and zoomed in, but when I played it back again, the figure was gone. Just trees. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I had been alone all day, hadn't I? "It's nothing," I muttered to myself, shaking off the creeping unease. Probably a glitch in the camera, some kind of light distortion. I'd seen that before, but even as I tried to rationalize it, my eyes kept drifting back to the tree line, scanning for movement. Nothing. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise made me sit up in bed, ears straining, heart pounding. But the forest was quiet, just the occasional rustle of leaves. Still, that feeling, the gnawing sensation of being watched, clung to me, even as the fire burned down to embers outside. The next morning, I pushed my nerves aside and geared up again. Today was the day I was going to push deeper into the trail. I was determined to find something, anything, that could give my channel the edge I was looking for. I packed my camera, drone, and enough supplies to last until nightfall. As I set off, something felt different. The forest had taken on an oppressive quality. The air was heavier, the light dimmer. The trail seemed to have changed too. The trees were growing closer together, the undergrowth thicker. Landmarks I thought I'd passed before were suddenly missing, or maybe I'd misremembered them. Either way, I felt more disoriented than I'd like to admit. But I pressed on. Several hours into the hike, my camera started malfunctioning. The battery, fully charged that morning, drained rapidly. The drone refused to take off. When I checked the footage I'd shot, static filled the screen, blurring everything. My frustration grew, but I wasn't about to quit. Not yet. That's when I saw it again. Ahead on the trail. The figure. It stood between two trees, far enough away that I couldn't make out any details, but close enough to feel its presence. Tall, impossibly tall, and still. My breath hitched as I fumbled for the camera, but by the time I raised it, the figure had vanished again. I stood frozen for a moment, my pulse racing. What the hell was that? I wasn't imagining things. There had been someone, or something, out there. But there was no sign of anyone now. No footprints, no rustling leaves, just silence. I should have turned back then. I should have packed up and left. But something deeper than curiosity kept me going. It was pride, maybe ego, the need to prove to myself that I wasn't just a YouTuber chasing shadows. I was a professional. I knew these woods. I pressed on, my mind racing with thoughts of how this footage, real or not, could be my breakthrough. I could see the thumbnails, the titles, the cursed collector trail, captured on film. It would go viral. Guaranteed. But as the hours dragged on, the trail seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. I wasn't sure how far I'd gone anymore. The sun, which should have been high in the sky, seemed to hang low, casting long shadows earlier than it should have. And then I heard the whispers. At first, they were faint, barely audible over the crunch of my boots on the dirt. But the deeper I went, the clearer they became. Voices, indistinct, like a conversation just out of earshot. I stopped, straining to listen. My heart thudded in my chest. Ryan. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but hearing my name sent a cold shiver down my spine. I spun around, scanning the forest, but there was no one. Just trees. And then there it was again, the figure, closer this time. It stood in the shadows, tall and unmoving, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I took a step back, my breath quickening. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. Ryan. The voice was clearer now, coming from the figure. My legs felt heavy, frozen in place as I stared, unable to look away. It didn't move, didn't approach. It just stood there, watching. I fumbled for my camera, hands shaking, but when I hit record, the screen flickered and went black. The battery was dead again. My phone, too, completely drained, though it had been fully charged that morning. Panic surged through me. I turned and bolted down the trail, my feet pounding the dirt. But no matter how far I ran, the forest seemed to stretch on forever. The landscape twisted around me, trails splitting off in directions I hadn't seen before, paths looping back on themselves. I was trapped. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a tree, my head spinning. The whispers hadn't stopped. They circled around me now, growing louder, more insistent. Come deeper. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fear that clouded my mind. I wasn't going to let this happen. I'd survived worse. I just needed to think, to get my bearings. But then I saw it. My camp, the RV. I stumbled forward, relief flooding through me as I reached the clearing. But something was wrong. The RV looked different, older, like it had been sitting there for years, weathered and decaying. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. This wasn't possible. I had only been gone a day, 2 at most. But the way the RV sagged, its windows cracked, and the rust that ate away at the metal, it felt like I'd been gone for much longer. Ryan! The voice was right behind me. I turned, and there it was, the collector. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its shadows stretching toward me, its eyes glowing brighter now, like embers in the dark. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Ryan, come with me. The collector's voice was a low whisper, soft and inviting, pulling at me, urging me to follow. It took a step forward, and I could feel its presence, heavy and cold, as though the very air around me had thickened. No, I choked out, my voice barely audible. The collector's eyes burned into me, its shadow growing longer, reaching out. I stumbled backward, finally breaking free of the paralysis that gripped me. Without thinking, I turned and ran. My legs burned as I sprinted into the trees, away from the RV, away from the trail. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees twisting and shifting as I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. The whispers followed me, echoing in my ears, growing louder and louder until they became a roar. But I kept running, pushing through the exhaustion, the fear, the disorientation. I didn't stop until the first light of dawn broke through the trees, and when I finally did, I realized I had made it out. The forest was still behind me, the whispers gone, the collector nowhere in sight. I was alive, but I didn't feel relief, only emptiness. I left the Sawtooth National Forest that day, my RV abandoned where it had been claimed by the forest. I never posted the footage. There was nothing to show anyway, just static, shadows, and whispers. And sometimes late at night, I can still hear the collector calling my name, waiting. It was the sort of mechanical hum that makes you think your ears are playing tricks on you, a constant, low-frequency vibration that seemed to be coming from the very earth beneath my feet. Working for the U.S. government on secret genetic experiments at a secluded facility deep in the forests of Northern California had its fair share of odd moments, but this was different. My name's Larry Ward, a lab tech by trade and an inadvertent sleuth by circumstance. That morning, we were introduced to Lev Grumman, our new head of security, an enigmatic figure with piercing blue eyes that scanned everything with meticulous skepticism. Lev's presence was commanding, and his lack of words matched only by his ability to convey everything with just a look. Most of us found it unnerving, especially Jared Mano, our lead researcher, who never missed a chance to break the ice with a joke. If looks could kill, we'd need a new security head every week. Developments at the lab were always on a need-to-know basis, which meant we rarely knew anything until it was directly in front of us, under a microscope. But that sound, it didn't take long before Lev and I were searching the facility's perimeter, guns securely holstered at our hips. No amount of training could prepare us for what lay beyond the tree line. A trail of devastation cut through the woods, trees uprooted, earth gouged as if by massive claws. Lev signaled for silence as we moved closer to investigate one particularly large crevice. Throwing in a glow stick revealed something horrifying, remnants of what appeared to be tissue samples intermingled with metallic fragments. What kind of experiment could do this? Lev whispered, more to himself than to me. We heard rustling, sudden and close. Weapon in hand, Lev motioned me backward when, out from the shadow, emerged Dr. Sheila Kavinsky. Her lab coat was marred with grime and blood streaks. She was visibly shaken, but managed to spit out her encounter before collapsing. Its skin, like an old folk tale, not human. The facility blared into lockdown mode immediately after we stumbled back inside with Sheila. As per protocol during breaches, no outside help could be called. Containment and secrecy were paramount above all else. As night fell over the forest canopy like a shroud, Jared joked uneasily while bandaging Sheila's wounds. Guess even Mother Nature doesn't want us messing around in her backyard, huh? The attempt at humor did little to cut through the growing tension. Scouring over video surveillance yielded no images beyond an amorphous blur that seemed both part of the forest and yet foreign to it. A creature from local folklore, perhaps. A being that should not exist per natural law, yet left behind tangible carnage. Weapon drawn once more, I roamed the now dimly lit corridors toward where the creature had last been seen on camera. Every shadow seemed animated by some unseen force. Every slight creak from metal heating or cooling now signified potential movement. Just then, control room alarms blared, reporting multiple breaches along various sections of the compound's infrastructure. The unknown assailant wasn't acting randomly. Its movements were strategic, intelligent. Jared radioed through panicked breaths while barricading himself within Research Lab 3. Larry, it's going through walls as if they're paper, like it knows exactly where. The radio cut off abruptly mid-sentence, followed by deafening silence, as if all life itself had been sucked out from around me. I froze. The silence after Jared's last words hung thick in the air. I resisted the urge to call out for him. It would reveal my position. Instead, I backed slowly toward the nearest exit, keeping my eyes peeled for any sign of movement. A sudden commotion outside drew my attention. Screams from my colleagues mixed with a sound that resembled ripping metal. I edged toward a window and risked a glance. A large figure moved with unnatural swiftness, tearing apart barriers as though they were made of cloth. It stood at least 8 feet tall. Its skin appeared to be a mix of rough textures, similar to bark and stone. Muscle rippled beneath the surface as it moved, each limb ending in what could only be described as claws, sharp and efficient. Radio static brought me back to focus. I pressed the talk button. Evacuate immediately. No code for this scenario existed. Improvisation was all that was left. In a blend of planning and instinct, I sprinted to Lab 4. There might be a flare gun there. Upon entry, I noticed Marie lying motionless by her desk, her body mangled in a way that no fall or accident could cause, confirming she wouldn't need the flare gun anymore. Without hesitation, I grabbed the gun and dashed out of the lab toward the southern emergency exit, away from where that creature was last seen. Outside, under the scant moonlight, I let off several bright red flares into the sky. It was all I could do as a signal for help outside of our compromised communication system. Then I ran into the woods in the hopes of finding shelter until rescue arrived. After hours spent hidden within an abandoned ranger station, dawn approached, and with it came the sound of helicopters and shouted commands through megaphones. An extraction team found me just as daylight began to repel the night's shadows. They asked about survivors or what had happened, but I could only shake my head. In debriefing, they mentioned finding just one body, Marie, confirming no others remained at the compound. Now safe at a temporary facility, people in suits asked questions about security footage and creature behavior, but all remained speculation without solid evidence or understanding. Church bells from nearby towns rang for those lost, unsung heroes, while we survivors nursed our grief silently, offering respect to their memories without words. The story ended not with comprehension, but with acknowledgement. Something unknown had crossed paths with us, leaving behind chaos and prompting endless questions about what lurks unseen alongside us on this planet we thought we knew so well. I wasn't sure why I'd come back. Maybe it was the need for closure, a way to put everything behind me. It had been over a year since my wife, Sarah, passed away, and ever since I'd been drifting through life, avoiding people and dodging their well-meaning questions. When I was a park ranger, the forest had always been my sanctuary, and I thought maybe, just maybe, a trip back to the Cherokee National Forest would help clear my head. But as I parked my RV in a secluded spot deep in the forest, far away from the designated campsites, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was a mistake. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the trees, and I watched the colors fade into darkness as I set up camp. The last time I'd been here was with Sarah years ago, when life still made sense. Now, it was just me, alone with my thoughts. I wanted the isolation. I needed the silence, or at least that's what I told myself. I sat by the fire, the crackle of the flames, the only sound in the stillness of the forest. The night pressed in around me, thick and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I stared into the fire, my mind drifting back to Sarah. I could almost hear her laugh, see her smile through the flickering flames. That's why I was here, to say goodbye, to finally let her go. I thought this place, our place, would help me find some peace. I was wrong. It started with a phone call. I'd turned my phone off the moment I arrived. I didn't want any distractions, didn't need anyone bothering me. But as I sat there, staring into the flames, I heard it, the familiar sound of my phone ringing. I frowned, confused. I hadn't turned it back on. Slowly, I stood up and walked over to where I'd left it on the small table inside the RV. The screen was glowing, showing an unknown number. How was that possible? I had no signal out here, not this far from the nearest cell tower. Curiosity got the better of me. I answered the call. Hello? My voice was rougher than I expected, a little shaky at first. There was nothing but static, a low hum that buzzed in my ear. I was about to hang up when I heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakable. Dan? I froze. My blood turned to ice. It was Sarah's voice. Dan, it's me. My heart pounded in my chest as I gripped the phone tighter, my mind racing to find some logical explanation. It had to be a prank, some sick joke, but the voice, it was hers. The way she said my name, that soft, familiar tone. Sarah, I whispered, barely able to get the word out. The static surged louder now, drowning out the voice. I called out again, but the line went dead. I stood there in the RV, staring at the phone in my hand, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. What the hell just happened? I checked the call log. Nothing. No record of the call. It was like it had never happened. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind. Grief does strange things to people. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I just wanted to hear her voice again so badly that my mind had created it. But as I sat back down by the fire, the unease gnawed at me. Something felt wrong. The night wore on, and the fire died down to embers. I retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. The quiet felt oppressive now, too heavy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to forget the sound of her voice. Then the phone rang again. I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my ears. The screen glowed in the dark, the same unknown number flashing across it. I hesitated this time, but eventually answered. Dan? The voice was clearer now, more distinct. It was Sarah, no doubt about it. Come to me. The line crackled, and for a moment I swore I heard something else. A faint knocking sound, like someone tapping on the walls of the RV. I jumped out of bed and hurried to the window, peering out into the darkness. There was nothing, just the dense forest, silent and still. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to calm myself down. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think rationally. There was no way Sarah could be calling me. She was gone. I knew that. I'd buried her. But the voice, it was so real. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the RV had me on edge. By morning, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. The next day, I tried to distract myself. I hiked some familiar trails, took in the beauty of the forest, and reminded myself why I loved this place. But the feeling of unease never left me. It lingered like a shadow, always just out of sight. That evening, as I sat by the fire again, my phone rang. I stared at it, dread pooling in my stomach. The same unknown number, the same impossible call. I let it ring, watching the screen until it finally stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking maybe it was over. But then the RV shook. It was subtle at first, just a faint tremor, like something had bumped into it. I stood up, glancing around the campsite. No wind, no animals, nothing that could have caused it. Then I heard the knocking again. Soft, deliberate, like someone tapping on the side of the RV. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, shining the beam into the trees. The light cut through the darkness, but there was no one there. Just the empty forest, silent as ever. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. It had to be an animal, a deer maybe. But as I turned back to the RV, I saw it, a figure just at the edge of the trees. It was too far to make out clearly, but it looked like a person. My heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, squinting into the darkness. The figure stepped back, disappearing into the trees. I ran after it, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. "Wait!" But when I reached the spot where the figure had been, there was nothing. No tracks. No signs that anyone had been there at all. Just me and the towering trees, their branches twisting overhead like skeletal hands. I turned back, my head spinning. This couldn't be real. It had to be the grief, the isolation messing with me. Maybe I'd finally lost it. As I walked back to the RV, my phone rang again. I didn't want to answer it, but I couldn't stop myself. I picked it up, my hand trembling. "Dan, I'm here. Come to me." The voice was so clear now, so real. It sounded like Sarah was right there with me, just out of reach. "I miss you," she whispered. "Come find me." My chest tightened, tears stung my eyes. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe she was still out there, waiting for me. But I knew it wasn't her. It couldn't be. I slammed the phone down and ran into the RV, locking the door behind me. The knocking started again, louder this time, more insistent. Something wanted me to open that door. Something wanted me to follow. I sat there in the darkness, listening to the knocks, the whispers, my heart racing. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The following day, I packed up camp. Whatever was out there, I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I needed to leave now. But the forest had other plans. As I drove through the winding forest roads, trying to make my way back to the main road, I realized something terrifying. I was lost. No matter which turn I took, I ended up back in the same place. The same trees, the same path. The forest was keeping me here. My phone rang again. I ignored it, but the knock came back, echoing through the RV, louder and louder, until I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed on the brakes, jumped out of the RV, and screamed into the trees. "Leave me alone!" The forest answered with silence, and then the whispers returned. Sarah's voice, rising on the wind, calling to me, luring me deeper into the trees. I didn't follow. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed the only thing I had left, my lighter. I built a fire bigger than any I'd made before, the flames roaring into the sky. The knocks stopped, the whispers faded, the forest was quiet again. But I knew, deep down, it wasn't over. I eventually found my way out, back to civilization, but I left the RV behind. I couldn't bring myself to take it with me. I knew what was waiting in those woods. I never went back to the Cherokee National Forest, and every night when the phone rings, I don't answer, because I know it's not her. My name's Justin Murphy, and this took place in 2020 just outside Waterton Lakes National Park on the Canadian side of the border. The mountains had been calling me out for years, but this was the first time I had the freedom to just drive my RV out here, park, and let the wilderness drown out the noise of city life. 45, single, no kids, and for once in my life, no one to answer to. It was heaven, or so I thought. I just didn't expect that I'd be standing so close to hell, too. The park was almost deserted. It was late in the season, chilly, but not too cold, with fewer visitors than I'd hoped. But for a guy looking to get away from everything, I didn't mind the emptiness. My RV was parked in a spot a little away from the main campground, under the shadows of the towering pines and surrounded by the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. By the second day, though, I noticed something was off. In the distance, I saw a couple of crows circling something near an old hiking trail. Not a big deal out here, but there was an unusual energy around it. I decided to follow the path and check things out. Maybe I was just looking for a distraction, but curiosity is a strange thing when you're alone in the woods. After a few minutes' hike, I found what had grabbed the crow's attention: a torn backpack, half buried under some leaves, with clothes scattered around as if someone had left in a hurry. It looked fresh, and I found it odd. If it was from a recent camper, wouldn't they have filed a report by now? Well, I took a quick look around and figured someone probably had an unlucky encounter with a bear or had just panicked. But the next morning, the same crows were back, and this time they were closer to my RV. They weren't circling. They were perched, staring down at me like they were waiting for something. One even swooped down to land on my windshield, just staring through the glass like it knew something I didn't. Now, I'm not superstitious, but it was unsettling, and I decided to pack up and move a few miles away. I found another spot near the banks of a stream. It was peaceful there, with just the sound of the water rushing over rocks, and for a moment, I forgot the odd feeling that had been building since I found that bag. I spent the rest of the day fishing, hoping to catch something for dinner. As I sat there, a ranger I hadn't seen before showed up. He was tall, probably in his 50s, with scruffy dark hair and a jacket that looked older than I was. He was built tough and had a face like he'd seen more than his fair share of rough days. He didn't smile, didn't greet me, just nodded. "You here alone?" He asked in a voice as dry as the air. His tone wasn't friendly. It was almost accusatory, like I'd done something wrong. "Yeah," I replied, just trying to enjoy some quiet time. He looked at me, his eyes lingering, then muttered, "Watch yourself around here. Not everyone comes back from these woods." He turned and walked off before I could ask any more questions. Now, I'm no stranger to dark humor. I get it. Rangers have their own jokes, especially around city guys like me. But his delivery was cold, too serious to be a joke, and it left me feeling more than a little uneasy. That night, as I sat in my RV, the forest seemed to close in tighter. Every little sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of a leaf, felt amplified, like the woods were shifting around me. I tried to brush it off, but something gnawed at the back of my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Just past midnight, there was a soft knock on the RV door. I thought maybe it was that ranger coming back to scare me again. I opened the door, and to my surprise, there was a woman standing there, probably in her mid-30s, wrapped in a filthy coat. Her eyes darted around, and she looked desperate. "Please," she whispered, "you have to help me. They're looking for me." I froze. She had cuts on her face, her hands were trembling, and she looked half-starved. "Who's looking for you?" I asked, stepping out of the RV and looking around, expecting someone to appear out of the darkness. "They?" She trailed off, glancing over her shoulder. "Please, please, I don't have much time." I grabbed a blanket and handed it to her. "Let's get inside," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The hairs on my neck were standing on end, but I wasn't about to turn her away. Once she was inside, I locked the door and started asking questions, but she didn't make much sense. She mumbled about people watching her, following her, and how she'd been hiding for days. She said something about the others, people who had been missing like her, drawn into the woods. She kept looking out the window, her hands clenching and unclenching like she expected someone to break in at any moment. I tried to calm her down, but then I heard a sound outside, heavy footsteps circling the RV, slow and deliberate, like someone was taking their time. My heart pounded as I peeked out the window, only to see that ranger again, standing just a few feet away, staring right at me. "What are you doing?" I called out, trying to mask my fear with bravado. No answer. He just kept staring, his face unreadable. After what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked off into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I watched him go, half relieved, half terrified. When I turned back to the woman, she was curled up on the couch, wide-eyed and shaking. "He's one of them," she whispered. "One of the people they send out to find us." That night felt like it lasted forever. I kept the lights off, too scared to attract attention, and I barely slept. By dawn, she had slipped away, disappearing as mysteriously as she'd appeared. I tried to rationalize everything, convince myself it was some kind of sick joke or that she was just another camper gone paranoid from isolation. But when I went outside to pack up, I found her blanket on the ground, smeared with blood. I decided it was time to leave, but my RV wouldn't start. Not a chance. I checked the engine, but nothing looked wrong. It was as if someone had tampered with it, but I had no tools, no way to fix it out here. That's when the ranger showed up again. This time, he didn't bother with greetings. He stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at me with a look I can only describe as predatory. "Looks like you're stuck here," he said, his tone colder than before. I tried to stay calm, but my voice wavered. "Mind giving me a hand? Looks like something's wrong with the engine." He tilted his head as if weighing my request. "Maybe, but it might be best if you just stayed here. Lots of people find these woods comforting." I felt the chill run through me. "I'm not planning to stay," I said, trying to stand my ground. He just shrugged and walked away, leaving me stranded and alone. I spent the next hour trying everything I could think of to get the RV running, but nothing worked. The woods felt oppressive, as if the trees were closing in, and every rustle made me jump. It was getting dark, and I had no choice but to wait for morning. Around midnight, I heard something, a low dragging sound, as if someone was pulling something heavy through the dirt. It was coming from the direction of the trail where I'd found the torn backpack. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out against my better judgment. The sound was closer now, and I swung the beam of light around, half expecting to see that ranger, but it wasn't him. Instead, there was a figure in the distance, a woman dragging what looked like a large burlap sack. She stopped when she saw me, dropping the sack, which hit the ground with a heavy, sickening thud. "Help me," she whispered, her voice carrying through the cold night air. I was frozen, torn between running and helping her. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days, her face hollow and pale. Before I could make a decision, I heard a voice behind me. "Get inside. Now." I turned, and the ranger was standing just a few feet away, his face twisted in a strange, almost hungry expression. I backed away, stumbling over my own feet as I tried to get back to the RV, but the woman, the one with the burlap sack, was gone. The ranger approached slowly, his footsteps unhurried. I scrambled into the RV and locked the door, but he just stood outside, smiling like he had all the time in the world. Then he knocked softly, patiently. "Come on, Justin," he said, using my name. "No one will believe you if you make it out of here. You're already part of the forest." The knocking continued, rhythmic and persistent. My heart pounded in my chest as the ranger's voice drifted through the thin walls of the RV, each word calm and deliberate. He kept knocking, soft and steady, as if he had all the time in the world. I backed away from the door, clutching a wrench I'd found in the drawer, a flimsy weapon, but it was all I had. Then the knocking stopped. Silence hung heavy in the air, thick enough to choke on. I strained my ears, waiting for some sound of him moving away, for his footsteps retreating, but there was nothing. My hands were slick with sweat, the wrench slipping slightly as I held it tighter. Just as I dared to peek out the window, a loud bang echoed from the rear of the RV. I whipped around, breath catching in my throat. Another bang, louder this time, came from the side. He was circling, testing every weak spot like a predator cornering prey. "Justin," his voice came from somewhere outside. "It's time to come out. You're wasting everyone's time." I inched back toward the driver's seat, frantically pulling at the keys, praying the RV would start up. Nothing, just the hollow clicks of the dead engine. The door's lock handle jiggled, and I felt my stomach drop. I thought about running out the back, but as I reached for the latch, I noticed something on the floor, a smudged, bloody handprint leading to the back storage compartment. It was fresh. I hadn't seen it earlier, but now, under the dim glow of the flashlight, I realized the woman from before must have hidden something, or someone, inside. The compartment was barely big enough to fit a person, but she'd squeezed someone into it. I braced myself and opened it. The smell hit me like a punch. The body inside was twisted, barely recognizable, eyes wide and frozen in terror. A deep gash ran across the neck, the edges jagged like it had been hacked by something rough. It was her. The bile rose in my throat, but I didn't have time to process. Outside, the ranger's voice grew softer, almost a whisper. "You've found her, haven't you?" I stumbled back. The image of her lifeless eyes seared into my mind. I slammed the compartment shut, backing away as I heard the door creak. The lock gave way, and I threw myself against the cabinet, hiding in the narrow space between the fridge and the wall, praying he wouldn't find me. My breathing was shallow, each inhale barely more than a gasp. The door creaked open. His heavy boots thudded against the floor as he stepped inside, taking his time. I could see his shadow shifting as he looked around, humming a tuneless melody. "Come out, Justin," he cooed, his voice sickly sweet. "She came here to hide too. Didn't work out for her either." I held my breath, every muscle in my body clenched so tight it hurt. He was getting closer, the weight of each step shaking the floor. I gripped the wrench, waiting, hoping he wouldn't notice the faint sound of my shallow breaths. The flashlight beam scanned the room, gliding over the walls and stopping inches from my hiding spot. But then he paused. His attention shifted to the bloody handprint on the floor. A smile twisted across his face as he bent down to inspect it, running his finger along the dried blood. "It's a shame, really," he muttered. "They all think they're so clever, finding places to hide." Before he could turn back toward me, I seized my chance. I swung the wrench down with everything I had, striking him square on the back of his head. He staggered, grunting as he collapsed forward. I didn't waste a second. I bolted past him, pushing out the door and into the fresh night air. I ran, my legs burning as I sprinted down the unmarked trail. The forest was a blur, branches tearing at my clothes and face, but I kept going. Somewhere behind me, I could hear him stumbling to his feet, cursing as he followed. I didn't look back. At last, I saw the dim glow of a road up ahead. It was empty, stretching in both directions, but I didn't care. I ran toward it, flagging down the first headlights I saw. A rusty pickup truck slowed as it approached. The driver, a burly bearded man, stared at me, bewildered. "Please," I gasped, waving him down. "Help me. There's a man in the woods. He's killing people." The driver hesitated but saw the panic in my eyes and gestured for me to get in. "Where?" he asked, already turning the truck around. I pointed back toward the forest, catching my breath. "He's at my RV, out on the eastern trails. There's a body inside the RV, a woman." He nodded, gripping the wheel tight as he sped toward the park ranger station, calling in backup on his radio. I slumped in the passenger seat, relief flooding over me. For the first time, I thought I might actually survive this. As we reached the ranger station, several officers were already waiting. They listened to my story, grim-faced, and organized a team to search the woods. Hours later, they found my RV and the compartment with the woman's body, but the ranger was gone, leaving nothing but the echoes of his threats in the trees. In the aftermath, the police shared some details they dug up. The ranger, Jeff Connolly, was an ex-ranger who'd been dismissed a decade ago after a series of campers had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. He'd simply vanished after his termination, slipping into the dense wilderness where he knew every trail and hiding spot like the back of his hand. As for why he did it, the officers believed he saw himself as the guardian of some twisted wilderness justice, punishing those who entered his territory without permission. He thought of himself as judge, jury, and executioner. My name's Richard Jones, and back in 2008, I decided to take a solo RV trip through the rough back roads of Oregon's Zoco National Forest. I was itching for an adventure, something to remind me I was alive. I'll admit I hadn't exactly lived life on the wild side, but I was always game for a challenge. I was the kind of guy who considered fixing my own coffee machine a risk worth bragging about. Still, something about the wilderness called to me in a way that suburbia just didn't. This trip was supposed to be a simple escape from city noise and cell service, with no company but the trees, my thoughts, and a paperback I had been trying to finish for over a year. I was barely 2 hours into the journey when I hit the first snag, a flat tire. It was irritating, but I had a spare, so I got to work and managed to fix it without too much cussing. The real trouble came about an hour later when I pulled into a secluded spot to set up camp, only to find it wasn't as empty as I had expected. There was a rusty old RV parked on the other side of the clearing, barely visible behind a stand of trees. A man was sitting on a folding chair outside, skin dark from years in the sun, wiry frame hidden under layers of tattered clothes. He looked like he'd been there for days, maybe weeks. I gave him a quick nod, trying not to stare, but I couldn't help noticing the half smirk on his face, like he'd been waiting for someone. I set up my RV, making sure to put a solid distance between us. I'd run into plenty of odd characters on past trips, but something about this guy unsettled me. Maybe it was the way he didn't look away, or the fact that he didn't seem to have any gear around him. No food, no water, nothing but that chair in his RV. As the evening stretched on, I tried to distract myself with my book, but I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see him standing right there. Around dusk, I heard footsteps outside, followed by a knock on my door. I peered through the window and saw him standing there, hand raised as if he'd been about to knock again. Against my better judgment, I opened the door a crack and asked if he needed anything. He tilted his head, eyes glinting in the fading light, and said in a voice rough as gravel, "Just thought you might want some company out here. It's lonely, you know." His words sounded casual, but there was something off about his tone, too friendly, too insistent. I mumbled something about having plans for the night and shut the door, locking it twice for good measure. Through the window, I watched as he shrugged and strolled back to his own RV, whistling a tune I couldn't quite place. The evening passed slowly, and every so often I heard faint sounds from his direction, a scrape, a muffled laugh, a quiet murmur that could have been a conversation. But when I looked out, there was no one else. By midnight, I was on edge, but exhaustion eventually pulled me under, and I fell asleep. I woke to a loud bang that rattled the whole RV. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, but the banging continued, coming from the back of my vehicle. I scrambled out of bed, heart pounding, and peered through the back window. He was there, standing so close his breath fogged the glass, his face twisted in an expression that looked like a mix of anger and delight. "Let me in," he hissed, voice barely audible but sharp enough to slice through my panic. I grabbed the only weapon I had, a rusted crowbar I kept for emergencies, and held it tight, willing myself to stay calm. When he didn't get an answer, he started circling the RV, tapping his knuckles along the walls as if searching for a weak spot. My mind raced, running through every possible escape plan, but each one ended the same way, with him finding a way inside. I was trapped, and he knew it. After what felt like hours, he stopped and muttered something under his breath, loud enough for me to hear one word: "Tomorrow." Then he walked back to his RV, leaving me in a silence so thick I could barely breathe. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping the crowbar like it was my lifeline. The next morning I packed up and prepared to leave as fast as I could. But just as I was about to start the engine, I glanced in the mirror and saw him standing there, blocking the road with his arms crossed. I was in no mood to play games, so I honked the horn, hoping he'd take the hint and move. Instead, he walked over to my window, that same smirk on his face. "Going somewhere?" he asked, voice dripping with mock innocence. I told him I had an emergency back home, something that required me to leave immediately. He just chuckled, shaking his head slowly. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered so low I almost didn't catch it. "This place has a way of keeping people." I clenched the wheel, resisting the urge to slam the gas and plow through him, but his gaze pinned me in place, as if he knew I didn't have the nerve. I don't know what possessed me to try reasoning with him, but I found myself saying, "Look, I don't want any trouble. I just came here to relax." "Trouble finds people like you," he replied, voice darkening. "City folk always thinking they're safe behind locks and fences. Out here, none of that means anything. He took a step back, eyes scanning the RV like he was sizing it up, then walked back to his own vehicle. I didn't waste another second. I started the engine, ready to peel out, but when I tried to shift into drive, the gears jammed, grinding in a way that sounded almost intentional. I could see him in my side mirror, leaning against his RV, arms crossed, watching with that same smirk. I cursed under my breath, fighting with the gear stick, but it was no use. It was stuck. I climbed out, planning to check under the hood, but as soon as I did, he was beside me, moving so silently I didn't even hear him approach. "Need a hand?" he asked, tone dripping with mock concern. I backed away, heart hammering, but he just laughed, low and mean, like he knew exactly how much power he had. He grabbed a wrench from his pocket and offered it to me, handle first. I stared at it, wondering if this was some kind of trap, but he just stood there, waiting. When I finally took it, he stepped back, arms raised in mock surrender. "Go on," he said. "Try and fix it." With shaking hands, I opened the hood and took a look, but I barely knew what I was doing. The engine looked fine, at least to my untrained eyes, but every time I tried to start it, the gears jammed again. And every time I looked up, he was there, just watching, arms crossed, smirk fixed on his face like he was savoring every second of my frustration. After nearly an hour, I gave up, muttering something about calling a tow. He chuckled again, shaking his head. "No service out here," he said. "You're stuck. Might as well get comfortable." I considered walking, but the nearest town was miles away, and I didn't trust him not to follow. So I stayed, nerves frayed, waiting for night to fall, knowing I wouldn't be able to sleep with him so close. As darkness crept in, I locked every door, every window, praying it would be enough. Around midnight, I heard footsteps again, soft but deliberate, circling the RV like a predator sizing up its prey. Then came the tapping, knuckles rapping against the windows, the roof, the doors. I gripped the crowbar, sweat slicking my palms, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, almost guttural laugh, and then his voice, muffled but unmistakable. "Come on out, city boy. Let's see what you're made of." I held my breath, willing him to leave, but the silence that followed felt even worse. Minutes stretched into hours, and still he lingered, pacing outside, muttering to himself. At some point, exhaustion claimed me, and I slipped into a fitful sleep. I woke to the smell of smoke. Panicking, I scrambled out of bed and saw flames licking at the back of my RV. I grabbed the fire extinguisher and managed to put it out before it spread, but my heart sank when I realized it had been set intentionally. A small bundle of sticks and rags lay at the base, charred and smoking. A crude attempt at arson. The man was nowhere in sight, but I knew he hadn't gone far. I packed up what little I could carry, deciding then and there to abandon the RV and hike back to civilization. I'd barely made it a mile when I heard footsteps behind me, quick and heavy, gaining fast. I turned, crowbar raised, and saw him there, eyes gleaming with something between anger and glee. He lunged, and we grappled, my grip slipping as he pushed me to the ground. Desperation lent me strength, and I swung the crowbar, catching him in the leg. He stumbled, cursing, but before he could recover, I bolted. The forest seemed endless, trees blurring together as I ran, heart hammering, lungs burning. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind me, his voice taunting, mocking, daring me to keep running. Somehow, I made it to the edge of the forest where a patrol truck was parked. The ranger inside took one look at me, bloodied, breathless, and didn't ask questions. He radioed for backup, and within minutes, the area was swarming with officers. They found the man near my RV, muttering to himself, hands stained with dirt and ash. Turns out he'd been squatting in the forest for years, attacking anyone who wandered too close. As they hauled him away, he looked at me, eyes full of that same twisted delight, and whispered, "This place doesn't like strangers." The ranger told me later they found remnants of old campsites littered with bones, tools, and even a few wallets. Apparently, I hadn't been his first target, just the first to escape. After a long silence, the ranger asked if I wanted to keep any of the belongings they'd found scattered around. I told him I'd pass. My name is Mark Norman, and it all took place back in 1989 on the Gila River Indian Reservation in Arizona when I was 23 and living in a battered trailer not far from the Tribal Education Center, trying to piece my life together after dropping out of trade school and feeling about as confident in my future as a three-legged coyote stumbling across the desert. I remember that morning clearly because I woke up nursing a mild hangover after an evening spent laughing at my own expense with my cousin Tai over cheap beers. Apparently, I'm quite good at telling jokes about my terrible sense of direction and my inability to keep my truck's engine running for more than a week without something rattling loose. I stepped outside and the early light settled on the pale dirt, cracked and dry. The cottonwood trees scattered along the riverbank stretched thin branches over shallow, slow-moving water. A group of children played a half-hearted game of tag 100 yards away, their laughter drifting by, small and harmless. By the time I reached the old wooden bench where I usually sipped my instant coffee, I noticed our neighbor Asa walking toward me, looking uneasy and pale as if he had swallowed a hornet. Asa, a short man with long graying braids, slowed down as he approached. He tried to speak, but his voice came out in a faint whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Makai, we've got a problem near the old ranger shed." He shuffled his feet, his eyes darting behind me as if he expected something to leap out of the trailer's shadow. I joked that if this was about my truck parts going missing again, I'd probably just blame my mechanical incompetence. He didn't even smirk. I set my coffee down, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. We headed out on foot, following a dusty path that wound through brittle shrubs and patches of brittle grass. About 20 minutes in, Asa pointed toward a shape on the ground. As we got closer, the shape revealed itself to be Raymond, a young man from the community who sometimes helped me with odd jobs, hauling water barrels, fixing fence posts. He lay still in the dirt. I knelt beside him and saw that he would never help anyone again. His chest had deep gashes, jagged and violent. There were no bullet holes or shell casings, no footprints that made any sense. Something had torn him open as if he were no more than a burlap sack. Before I knew it, Asa stumbled back, muttering a phrase in our language that roughly means, "The darkness walks." I didn't know what to think. I tried to steady myself, but I kept picturing last night's jokes. They felt twisted now, as if laughter had no place in this world. Back at the reservation's main hall, I spoke with a tribal policeman named Keel, a tall man with a calm voice who usually broke up petty disputes and sometimes ran errands for the elders. He listened, nodded, and then took a long drag from a cigarette. He shook his head as if this murder was beyond his experience. "You sure it wasn't a big cat, Makai? A mountain lion?" I tried to explain that the cuts were too strange and uneven, that the body looked as though something almost experimental had happened. Keel frowned and said we should check it out that afternoon. I told him I would join him, even though I had no weapon and no training. I didn't own a gun. The few times I handled firearms were at my uncle's ranch, and he never let me keep one. Besides, my paycheck was always too small to invest in something like that. Instead, I grabbed an old hatchet with a splintered handle that I kept under my kitchen sink. I held it and gave Asa a forced half grin. I guess I'm the poor man's superhero, Hatchet Man, ready to save the day. Asa responded with a forced chuckle that sounded more like he was trying not to cry. That afternoon, Keel and I inspected Raymond's body again. Keel's radio crackled, and he learned a second body had been found near the old church ruins, a woman named Nara, older, quiet, dead with the same vicious wounds. Keel's jaw tensed. He said we needed help, maybe someone from outside the reservation. But the tribal leader, an old, no-nonsense woman named Elsie, insisted we try to handle it ourselves first. She believed something roamed our lands. Something that smelled of old stories and broken promises. I was stunned by her calmness, so I tried to lighten the mood. If we live through this, Elsie, remind me not to quit my day job to become a tour guide. She snorted once. That was something. By early evening, word spread through the small community. People gathered in small clusters, whispering theories. Someone said they saw strange tracks near a dried mud patch, prints too large for a coyote, too narrow for a bear. Another swore they heard shrieks in the distance. Keel asked me to help him keep watch that night. Asa joined us, carrying his father's old rifle. I teased him. Asa, just don't shoot me by accident. I'm no expert, but I'm fairly certain I'm too ugly to be mistaken for anything else. He muttered something about my hatchet and how I looked more scared than heroic. I couldn't argue. We found a spot near the ranger's old shed, a rickety structure with peeling paint and a sagging roof. The air cooled and the sky turned the color of a bruised peach. I waited, eyes drifting from one dark shape to another. Hours passed. The distant hum of cars on the highway barely reached us. Somewhere, an old generator chugged, powering a single light in a distant cabin. I tried to keep my mind busy. I thought about my grandfather, who always scolded me for cutting corners in my daily work. I thought about my cousin Ty's one-liners, his bad puns about rattlesnakes, they're so hysterical, and how he managed to poke fun at my love life, or lack thereof, whenever he had a chance. Then Keel tapped my shoulder. He nodded toward the darkness beyond a stand of mesquite trees. A shape moved there, a large figure low to the ground. Asa lifted his rifle. I gripped my hatchet as it approached. Moonlight touched its form. It resembled a massive canine, maybe something like a wolf, but it had an oddly elongated body, as if someone had stretched a coyote's frame too far. The fur looked patchy, and its front legs had what appeared to be bony protrusions near the joints. It had no fear of us. It moved closer, shoulders rolling under its hide. I wanted to say something clever, something that would break the terror, but my throat tightened. I only managed a hiss of air. Asa fired a shot. It missed. The thing darted sideways in a blur. Keel cursed under his breath. I tried to circle around, my boots kicking up dust. The creature moved so fast I barely saw it. Then I heard Asa cry out. I turned and saw him on the ground, bleeding from the shoulder, his rifle flung aside. The beast struck again, jaws snapping like a trap. The sound reminded me of someone violently cracking a bone. I raised my hatchet and rushed forward, shouting nonsense as if my voice could scare it. The beast pivoted, and I caught a glimpse of its face, like a fox, but warped. Its eyes reflected no kindness. Its teeth looked like they could shred metal. Keel tried to tackle it, failing miserably. The creature leaped over him, landing with a thud. I swung my hatchet in a desperate arc. It slammed into the creature's flank. The blade didn't sink deep enough. The creature snarled and struck Keel's leg, dragging him several feet before I managed another strike. This time I aimed at the neck area, hacking wildly. I felt hot liquid splash my face. It smelled foul, like rotten meat. The creature released Keel and staggered, but didn't run. Instead, it tried to snap at me. I backpedaled, nearly tripping over Asa's rifle. Asa groaned, struggling to stand. I kicked the rifle toward him. He snatched it and fired 2 shots. One must have hit the creature because it screamed in a shrill, unnatural tone, then lowered its head and came at me again. I swung the hatchet, connecting with its jaw. Cracking bone. A terrible shudder ran through it. It backed away, then lunged sideways at Asa, who fired again at close range. The bullet took a chunk of fur and flesh from its side. Now it looked injured and uncertain. I yelled something ridiculous. I hope you're not here to sell life insurance. A shaky, useless joke, but it steadied my nerves for one critical second. I stepped forward, hatchet raised, and struck the creature's skull with everything I had. The handle broke in my hand. The creature collapsed, twitching, then fell still. We waited, panting. I knelt beside Keel, who bled from his leg. Asa clutched his shoulder. We needed help soon. A few others arrived, drawn by the gunshots. They found us around the carcass. Elsie came, her face grim but relieved to see us alive. I half expected someone to crack a joke about my broken hatchet or ask if we'd set a new record for worst teamwork in a fight, but no one did. Instead, Elsie looked at the dead creature and muttered a prayer. She asked what it looked like. I described it like a coyote stretched too thin, warped into something worse. She nodded as if she had expected something terrible. Keel and Asa were carried to a makeshift infirmary. I limped back to my trailer, my hands shaking. I washed my face and tried to calm my racing heart. Early the next morning, a small group gathered to examine the body. It definitely wasn't a normal animal. It had no tags, no signs of disease that they recognized, just twisted flesh and bone. The tribe's leaders decided to burn it, to let no one else see it. We agreed there was no point in inviting outsiders who might just use it as an excuse to mock our community or spin wild stories. Before they set it on fire, I stared at that thing's lifeless form. I wondered what made it hunt us. Maybe it belonged to some hidden population in these deserts, creatures evolved in secret corners of the land. Maybe it followed the scent of human life, easy prey to tear apart. Perhaps it had a reason, some instinctual pattern, maybe hunger, territoriality, or even a strange adaptation to the harsh environment. I could only guess. When we scattered its ashes, the reservation felt quieter. Asa recovered, sporting a bandaged shoulder and cursing his bad luck. Keel ended up with a limp, but he laughed when I said I was as reliable as a broken carburetor. People asked fewer questions than I expected. We shared a sense that we had confronted something beyond ordinary explanation. Life went on. I went back to tinkering with my truck, telling self-deprecating jokes about how I survived a fight with an ugly beast, but still couldn't fix a radiator. The community healed in its own way, though no one forgot what happened. By sunset, I sat again outside my trailer, sipping terrible coffee, remembering that shrill cry and the unnatural shape of that creature. I thought of how it attacked without fear, how it killed without hesitation. Maybe it was driven by instincts we couldn't imagine, guided by hunger or pain or something else entirely. Maybe it had been forced out of its hidden den by scarcity and desperation. I would never know for sure, but I knew this. We fought back, we endured, and we kept our small world intact. My grandfather would have called that a kind of success. As I sat there, I felt no laughter ready on my tongue, no immediate joke to tell. But I did feel something else, an odd sense of calm, a certainty that my place here, uncertain as it might be, was still worth defending. The mist rolled in quicker than I'd expected, but I didn't mind. I loved the fog, loved the way it muted everything, softened the edges of the world, made it all feel a little more mysterious. It was perfect for my project. Whispers of the Wild was going to be my best work yet. I could feel it after everything I'd been through in the past year. Hell, in the past month. This was the reset I needed. Just me, my camera, and the Smoky Mountains. No one to answer to, no one to lean on, just the way I liked it. I hefted my backpack higher on my shoulders and adjusted my camera strap. The trail was rough, more overgrown than I'd expected, but that was part of the draw. The more remote the location, the better the shot. No tourists ruining the landscape with their neon jackets or loud conversations, just untouched wilderness. But untouched wilderness had its downsides. My camera had been acting up since I'd arrived. I'd missed some great shots because of it. Fog rolling over the peaks, a hawk perched on a branch just feet away. But I told myself I didn't care. This trip wasn't about getting everything right. It was about getting away. I paused to catch my breath and set the camera down on a fallen log. The lens fogged up almost instantly in the damp air, and when I wiped it off with the corner of my jacket, I realized I'd smeared dirt across it. Typical. "Come on," I muttered, digging into my bag for a lens cloth. As I crouched there, rubbing at the stubborn streak of mud, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was a woodpecker. There were plenty of them around these parts, but it didn't sound right. Too slow, too steady. Tap, pause, tap, pause. I looked up, but the fog was thickening, swallowing the trees just a few yards ahead of me. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was just a branch knocking against a tree in the wind. I wasn't scared of being out here alone. In fact, I preferred it. No one to distract me, no one to get in my head. Still, the silence that followed felt too quiet, like something was waiting. I shoved the lens cloth back into my pack and stood up, forcing myself to move on. I had a campsite to reach before dark, and I wasn't about to get spooked by a weird noise, at least not this early in the trip. The fog never really lifted by the time I reached the clearing where I planned to camp. It was so thick I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. I set up my tent quickly, more out of habit than anything else, though I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I wasn't sure why. There was no one around, no animals scurrying through the underbrush, not even a bird call to break the stillness. I figured a good night's sleep would shake off the nerves. I was just tired. The last few months had been brutal, breaking up with Paul, the constant fights before it, the way he made me feel like I couldn't do anything right. This trip was supposed to be my way of proving him wrong, proving to myself that I didn't need him, that I didn't need anyone. But the anxiety crept up on me anyway, a tight knot in my chest as I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the ceiling of my tent. Then there was that tapping again, faint and far off. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, just the wind, just the forest. But then it stopped abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch, and I heard something else, something worse. A whisper. It was so faint I could barely make it out, but it was there, threading through the fog outside. It didn't sound like words, not exactly, but it was too rhythmic to be winning, too deliberate. I sat up, listening hard, my heart racing. Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it through the thin walls of the tent. Just mist and shadows. The whispering stopped, but the silence that followed felt alive, thick with something I couldn't name. I switched off the light, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I packed up quickly. I wasn't scared, I told myself. I just wanted to get moving. The fog had lifted slightly, but the forest felt wrong somehow, like it was holding its breath. I didn't like it. I wanted to get to higher ground, get some better shots, and move on. By midday, I'd made it to a rocky ridge that overlooked a valley. It was beautiful, exactly the kind of shot I'd come for. The fog clung to the trees below, creating a sea of white with the mountain peaks poking through like islands. I snapped a few photos, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. When I reviewed the pictures on my camera, my breath caught in my throat. There were figures in the fog. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, just shadows cast by the trees. But the more I zoomed in, the clearer they became. Tall, thin shapes, barely visible but definitely there. Human or something like it, standing motionless among the trees, watching me. I whipped my head around, scanning the valley below. There was no one, just mist and trees. But in the photos, the figures were there. I lowered the camera, heart pounding. I hadn't imagined it. I couldn't have, and yet the air around me felt suddenly cold. Not the kind of cold that comes with a change in the weather. This was different, deeper, like it had seeped into my bones. I should have left right then, packed up, and headed back to the main trail. But I didn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was keeping me here, pulling me deeper into the wilderness. That night, I camped by a small stream. I hadn't seen any more figures, but the unease clung to me like a second skin. I felt like I was being watched constantly. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing there, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I built a fire, more for comfort than warmth, and tried to distract myself by reviewing the day's photos. That's when I noticed something else. The figures in the fog weren't in just one picture. They were in all of them, some barely visible, others clearer, standing in groups or alone, always watching, always there. My hands started shaking, and I nearly dropped the camera. It was impossible. I'd been out there for hours, and I hadn't seen anyone. Not a single hiker, no animals, no birds. But there they were, in every shot. Suddenly, the whispering started again. It was louder this time, closer. I stood up, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. The beam of light cut through the mist, but I couldn't see anything. Still, The whispering grew louder, like it was circling me, coming from all directions at once. "You shouldn't be here." That's what it sounded like, a woman's voice, soft but firm, blending with the rustling leaves and flowing water. It wasn't clear, not exactly, but the meaning was clear. I wasn't welcome. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest, and backed toward the tent. The whispering followed me, growing sharper, angrier. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief second, I saw her. She stood at the edge of the trees, tall and thin, dressed in old, ragged clothes. Her face was pale, hollow-eyed, and filled with sorrow. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. The flashlight flickered back to life, and the whispering stopped. I didn't sleep that night. By the time dawn broke, I knew I had to leave. This wasn't some trick of the mind. No matter how much I'd tried to rationalize it, there was something in these woods, something angry, and I had trespassed. I packed up my gear in record time and set off toward the trailhead. But the forest seemed different now, like the trees were closing in on me. The path I'd taken to get here was gone, swallowed by the fog. My compass spun wildly, useless, and the map was no help in the unmarked wilderness. Panic gnawed at my insides as I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to keep my bearings. But the more I walked, the more lost I became. And all the while I could feel her watching, waiting. The whispering started again as I crossed a small clearing, louder this time, angrier. I dropped my pack, desperate, and spun around. There she was, standing in the mist, her eyes locked on mine. I fell to my knees, breath coming in ragged gasps. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though my voice was barely audible over the growing wind. "I didn't mean to." Her expression softened just slightly, and for the first time, I felt something other than fear. She wasn't just angry, she was in pain. "I'm sorry," I repeated, louder this time. "I shouldn't be here. I didn't know." The wind died down, the whispering faded, and slowly the figure in the mist began to dissolve, melting back into the fog. I sat there for what felt like hours, heart racing, too afraid to move. But she was gone. The air felt lighter, the forest less oppressive. When I finally stood, I saw it. Small, barely visible in the fog, a stone hidden among the trees. A grave, long forgotten, buried deep in the wilderness. I didn't touch it. I didn't even get close. I just stood there for a moment, paying my respects to the spirit I'd disturbed. Then, without looking back, I turned and walked away. I made it out of the Smokies that day, but the images, the figures in the fog, the woman's sorrowful eyes, followed me. I never published the photos from that trip. Some things I realized weren't meant to be captured. Some things were meant to be left alone. My name's Paul Miller, and this all went down back in 2012, around March, in the remote forest near Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. I was on a solo RV camping trip, something I'd been doing since I was a kid. These trips are my thing. There's nothing like it. Just you, your thoughts, and a beautiful, brutal stretch of nature. I'd driven my old 2004 Winnebago through the small Alaskan towns until they trickled down to dirt roads, and soon enough, it was only me and the vast, snowy emptiness. People in the last town I stopped by gave me all kinds of odd looks when I told them where I was heading. The forest was dense, lonely, a whole different beast from any place I had camped before. But hey, I was ready for it, or so I thought. The air was crisp, and a heavy silence blanketed the area as I parked near a frozen stream. I could hear the occasional crackle of ice shifting in the distance. I set up camp, cracked open a beer, and sat by the small fire I'd managed to get going, listening to the eerie quiet that settles in the woods at night. Sometime around midnight, I was starting to doze off by the fire when I heard footsteps in the snow, way too close for comfort. I sat up fast, scanning the trees. Figured it was maybe an animal, a moose or bear, but nothing showed. Just the occasional crunch of snow somewhere out there. "Who's there?" I called out, knowing it was pointless. I laughed to myself, shrugged it off, and eventually crawled back into the RV, locking the door more out of habit than fear. The quiet returned, but sleep wouldn't come easy after that. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I woke up to a loud banging on the RV door, something aggressive and desperate. My heart pounded as I reached for my flashlight. I called out, "Who's there?" again, but whoever it was just kept banging. I stayed silent, waiting. The banging stopped as suddenly as it had started, replaced by the faint crunching of footsteps circling the RV. Then, in the dead of night, I heard a low voice right outside my window, like someone muttering to themselves, but too faint to make out the words. I froze. Whoever was out there was right up against the RV. I stayed perfectly still, listening to the muttering, realizing it wasn't just rambling. It sounded like they were counting slowly, as if keeping track of time. Each number spaced out, the voice steady. When the muttering finally stopped, I waited, hoping it was over. Then I heard what I can only describe as a chuckle, like they'd thought of some kind of joke just for themselves. Something felt off, wrong on a level I'd never felt before. I waited until dawn to step out, gripping a fire poker I'd brought for roasting marshmallows, the closest thing I had to a weapon. There were tracks in the snow around the RV, deep, erratic paths that looped around multiple times. Whoever had been out there was barefoot, which sent a chill through me that I couldn't shake. I scanned the area, finding nothing but more footprints that faded into the trees. Shaken, I got back in the RV and decided I'd drive to the closest ranger station, a good 30 miles out. But the minute I tried to turn the ignition, I knew something was wrong. The RV wouldn't start, not even a click. I popped the hood, and what I found made my stomach drop. The wires had been cut. Clean, neat, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing had been at work. I backed away, scanning the trees, wondering if they were still out there, hiding, waiting. I almost laughed at myself for even thinking it, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I packed up what I could fit in my backpack and started walking, hoping to reach the ranger station by noon. 30 miles was no joke, but I was more afraid of staying put than of the hike ahead. I'd been walking for about an hour when I started hearing that counting again, somewhere behind me. My mind raced. I forced myself not to turn around, kept my pace steady, hoping it was just my imagination. But it got louder, closer. It was him, the same low, steady voice, counting. This time I could hear his footsteps too. Crunch, 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 keeping time with the numbers. I finally turned, expecting to see some wild-eyed man charging after me. But there was no one there, just endless trees. The path behind me, quiet again. I kept moving, faster this time, scanning the forest every few steps, straining to hear if he'd followed me. But there was nothing, just the occasional snap of a branch, which could have been anything. The strangest part, as I kept moving, I started finding things in my path. Little objects in the snow that hadn't been there before. A single glove, a rusted hunting knife, a small plastic bag with something in it, like a clump of dark hair or animal fur. It felt like someone was leaving a trail, leading me somewhere. I ignored it, refused to touch anything. But the feeling that I was being played with gnawed at me. Another hour passed. I didn't hear the counting again, but the paranoia was eating at me. Every shadow seemed like him, every sound an echo of his footsteps. I kept a grip on that fire poker, feeling ridiculous, but too scared to let go. The path started to slope uphill, and I figured I was getting closer to the ranger station. Then I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks, a makeshift campsite just off the trail. An old ratty tent pitched in a clearing. My skin crawled at the sight of it. There were empty cans, scraps of food, and scattered belongings. It looked like someone had been living out there a while, hidden in the trees. But the worst part was what was hanging from the branches around the campsite. Bones, strung up with bits of cloth, dangling like some kind of twisted wind chime. I stepped back, stomach churning. Some of the bones looked human, small, like they could have been from a child. I heard a twig snap behind me and whipped around, poker raised, ready to swing. There he was, a lanky man with tangled hair and a wild look. His clothes, nothing more than rags. He grinned at me, showing teeth that looked like they hadn't seen a toothbrush in years. "Well, look who wandered into my neck of the woods," he drawled, his voice like gravel. I took a step back, keeping the poker between us. "Did you mess with my RV?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed, a low, mean sound. Maybe I did. You sure got a pretty setup there. Looked too easy not to mess with." "Why?" I asked, my heart hammering. He cocked his head as if the question surprised him. "Why not? It's lonely out here, friend. Gotta make my own fun." Then he lunged. It was fast, faster than I'd expected. I swung the poker, connecting with his shoulder, but he barely flinched. He shoved me hard, and I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the ice. He was on me in a second, hands reaching for my throat. I kicked out, catching him in the knee, and he let out a grunt, just enough for me to scramble to my feet. I ran, ducking between trees, not daring to look back. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches snagging my clothes, slowing me down. I could hear him crashing through the snow, laughing like he was having the time of his life. I forced myself to keep moving, praying I'd lose him in the trees. At some point, I tripped and fell hard, the wind knocked out of me. I lay there, gasping, and for a moment everything was silent. Then I heard his footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. I pushed myself up, ready to run again, but he was right there, grinning down at me. "Game's over," he said, raising something shiny, a hunting knife covered in rust. But then, just as he moved in, a loud shout echoed through the forest. He froze, eyes wide, and stumbled back, clutching his arm, which was now bleeding. A ranger stepped out from the trees, rifle raised, eyes cold. "You all right?" he asked, barely glancing at me. His focus was on the man, who was now cursing under his breath, cradling his wounded arm. The ranger didn't wait for an answer. He stepped forward, gun steady, and the man backed away, that wild grin finally fading. He turned and disappeared into the trees, running as fast as he could. The ranger lowered his rifle and nodded at me. "Come on, let's get you out of here." I didn't say a word, just followed him, stumbling over the snow. I looked back once, but the man was gone. Just the tracks left in the snow and the hanging bones swaying in the cold morning air. The ranger drove me back to town, where I gave a statement to the local police. Turns out they'd been tracking that man for years. He was an old prospector, they said, gone rogue after his family died. Some folks claimed he'd gone mad from the isolation, living out there and luring in unsuspecting campers for fun. The police found the campsite, the bones, everything. My name's Brian Gibson. Back in 2012, I was working for the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, dealing with one of the oddest cases that had ever crossed my desk, and I'd been at this for almost a decade by then. I thought I'd seen it all until I landed in a remote corner of the Catskill Mountains to look into a case that just kept getting stranger the deeper I went. The details came in rough. Somewhere outside the nearest town of Rosendale, there were reports of 2 campers gone missing, friends, no family connection, both locals from downstate who had decided to do a weekend trip out of the city. Typical enough, really, until you hit the next part. According to the county sheriff's report, another camper, a guy named Joey Kessler, found their campsite abandoned. Sleeping bags, supplies, tents, still up. He claimed he'd heard something wrong out there, but nothing clear enough to explain what happened to those 2. The way he described it to the deputies sounded like your basic, they just took off situation, so they didn't dig too deep, until he finally got pushy enough. Now, normally I'd handle cases like these from a distance. Paperwork, missing persons reports, coordinates for search teams. But something in the initial report bothered me. Joey had been pretty insistent that there was something wrong out there, something he couldn't quite explain. It was vague enough that I chalked it up to his imagination until he described the last thing he'd seen. Footprints. Deep, like someone had just stomped all over the campsite. And then he added, they weren't exactly human either. Curiosity got the better of me. A drive out there, 2 hours from the closest hotel, wasn't too much to ask for a first-hand look. Besides, after staring at paperwork for so long, you start to wonder if you've lost your edge. The sheriff, Grant Winslow, picked me up from the edge of town. He was as haggard and resigned as you'd expect out here. One of those old-timers who didn't see much difference between city folk and the critters running around his forests. He was smoking on the ride, clearly irritated to have another federal type poking around in his woods. "Brian, right?" he asked, glancing over with a kind of squint. "Don't see why they sent you all the way out here. Boys go missing all the time around these parts." "Maybe," I said, but Joey Kessler seemed pretty shaken up, don't you think? "Joey's always shaken up over something," Grant grunted, tossing his cigarette butt out the window. "But yeah, his story this time is a bit odd. So you do what you gotta do. But I tell you, once you set foot in that spot, you'll see there's nothing out of the ordinary. It's a forest. Forests are strange. People just don't belong here." I let the silence settle as we drove the next 30 minutes up into the hills, all the way to the start of a rough trail that would lead us to the campsite. Grant parked the truck and gestured toward the trail. "All right. This way, unless you've got your own map," he said, already heading up. "I'll take the lead," I replied, trying not to let him see that I was itching to get a better look at whatever had spooked Joey. I wasn't a fan of unexplainable things, but I'd come across enough bizarre scenes in my work to know when to trust my gut. And my gut was telling me there was more here than a standard missing persons case. The trail was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The usual chirps, rustles, even the sound of the wind seemed muffled, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Grant seemed to notice too, but he waved it off, grumbling about city types who didn't get how quiet real wilderness could be. I might have let it go if it wasn't for a smell that hit me halfway down the trail. It was faint but unmistakable, something rotten, pungent. I slowed, glancing around for any sign of wildlife or a carcass, but the area looked undisturbed. "Smell that?" I asked Grant, hoping he'd confirm it was just some dead animal. "Dead critter, probably," he muttered. "Let's keep moving. It'll pass." But it didn't pass. If anything, it got stronger as we approached the clearing. And then, after another 100 yards, we found the campsite. The first thing that struck me was how untouched it looked. It was like a frozen snapshot. Everything as it should have been, except for the absolute silence and a lingering chill that felt unnatural. The tent was up, the sleeping bags were inside, and their supplies were scattered around, but not in a way that suggested anyone had been in a hurry. And there, just outside the tent, were the footprints Joey had mentioned. They weren't just footprints. They were deep impressions, larger than any I'd ever seen. Grant crouched down, poking at one with the end of his flashlight. "Hiker with big boots, I'm telling you," he said. But he didn't look convinced. "Looks bigger than any boot I've seen," I replied, crouching next to him, feeling an unease that settled like lead in my gut. There was something unsettlingly precise about the prints, like whoever or whatever had made them had been deliberately pressing down, making sure they left a mark. We split up, circling the campsite. I found the tent flap partially open, and inside were the 2 sleeping bags. One zipped up, one open. A flashlight lay in the corner, still covered in mud. I clicked it on, half expecting it not to work, but it flickered weakly to life. It was covered in something sticky and dark. I stared, unwilling to jump to conclusions, but it was hard to ignore the possibility that it was blood. "Grant," I called out, keeping my voice steady. He came over, peering in. His face hardened. "I've seen enough of these things, Brian," he said, voice low. "Kids get themselves hurt out here, or worse. You play with the wild. It plays back." "Sure," I muttered, barely listening. I clicked the flashlight off and set it aside, then glanced over at the edge of the campsite where I noticed something strange. There was a small mound of sticks and stones, oddly deliberate, almost like a marker of some kind. It was the only thing that didn't fit the careless camper vibe, and I couldn't shake the feeling it was meant to be found. Kneeling down, I reached out, intending to brush the mound aside, but Grant grabbed my wrist. "Don't," he said, his grip surprisingly firm. Look, whatever they were doing here, it's done now. No need to mess with it. I looked at him, surprised by his intensity, but I let it go. You think they were just out here having fun and got lost? I asked, feeling the absurdity of the suggestion. But Grant's face remained unreadable. He shrugged and muttered, "People come out here and sometimes they don't come back. Simple as that." Something about his tone sent a chill through me. This wasn't the first case like this he'd seen. Of that I was certain. We spent another hour scouring the campsite, finding only more bizarre details. 2 water bottles, both half empty, abandoned clothes, neatly folded but stashed under rocks, and a compass that didn't point north. By the time the sun began its descent, Grant was getting antsy, insisting we head back. But my gut told me I couldn't just leave. I didn't know what it was, but I felt like I was standing on the edge of something far darker than any routine missing persons case. "Stay back," I told him, my voice edged with a resolve I hadn't intended. He looked at me, puzzled, but stayed quiet as I took a few steps toward the mound. It felt like the temperature dropped. My breaths came out in visible puffs. Grant's face shifted. He was scared. I could tell. But I ignored him, reaching out to brush aside the sticks and stones. And then I found it. A crude symbol scratched into the ground beneath the mound. It was simple but unsettling. 2 interlocking circles with a slash through the center. I'd never seen anything like it, but it felt ancient, wrong. I snapped a photo, then turned to Grant. "Have you seen this before?" He shook his head, but there was a hesitation that told me he wasn't being honest. "What is it, Grant?" I demanded. "Just a symbol. Some of the locals think it's for protection," he said, voice low. He looked around as if expecting something to burst out of the trees. "Folks who know better avoid these spots." He turned, walking back toward the truck, muttering under his breath about cursed places and idiots tempting fate. I let him go, standing alone in the eerie quiet, staring at the mark. I couldn't shake the sense that I'd uncovered something I wasn't supposed to. And then, just as I was turning to leave, I heard it, a faint cry echoing through the trees coming from somewhere deep in the forest. I froze, trying to pinpoint the direction, but it seemed to come from all around me, like the sound was bending with the trees. Against every ounce of reason, I started toward it. The forest grew denser, darker, as I moved farther from the campsite. The trail twisted, the roots clawing at my feet, branches snagging my clothes. And then, just ahead, I spotted something, a tattered piece of fabric caught on a branch. It looked like it had been there for weeks. I grabbed it, feeling the coarse fabric under my fingers. But before I could inspect it closer, the cry came again, this time louder, more urgent. I took off running, pushing through the undergrowth, the smell of decay growing stronger. I stumbled into a clearing, and that's when I saw them. The 2 missing campers, or what was left of them, lay sprawled across the ground, their bodies mangled and half buried in the dirt. I choked back a gasp, realizing too late that I wasn't alone. A figure stood on the far side of the clearing, half hidden in shadow. Tall. Gaunt. Dressed in a makeshift robe pieced together from scraps of cloth. His face was obscured by a hood, but I could feel his gaze piercing through me, cold and calculating, looking for something. His voice was a rasp, low and cruel. "They wanted to know the secrets of this place," he said, stepping closer. "But some things aren't meant for the curious." In a flash, he lunged, his hand grabbing for something in his robe. I didn't wait to find out what. I turned and bolted, crashing through the forest, heart pounding, lungs burning. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps fast, relentless. But just as he closed in, I spotted the faint glow of Grant's truck up ahead. I stumbled out of the woods, practically throwing myself against the side of the vehicle, pounding on the door. Grant flung it open, eyes wide. "What the hell?" "Go. Go. Now." He didn't hesitate, slamming his foot on the gas, the truck lurching forward as we sped down the mountain road. I didn't look back, didn't breathe until the forest was a distant blur. Grant drove me back to town without a word. When we finally stopped, I turned to him, my voice hoarse. "That symbol. What does it mean?" He hesitated, his gaze dark. They call it the mark of the seeker. Those who wear it, they aren't like you or me. They're not bound by the same rules. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. I'd come out here looking for answers, and all I'd found was a darkness I couldn't explain. The next day, the sheriff's office found nothing at the campsite. The bodies were gone, the symbol erased like it had never been there. But I knew what I'd seen, and somehow I knew I'd barely scratched the surface of whatever secret lay hidden in those woods. I've always loved the quiet. That's the real reason I camp alone and hike alone. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about the silence. The kind of silence that presses against you like a weight, smoothing out the chaos of everyday life. Out here, far from deadlines and the blaring traffic, I can hear my own thoughts. But it's a fragile thing, the peace that the wilderness offers. I've learned that the quiet can also play tricks on you, turn on you. That's what happened to me in the San Juan National Forest. I'd been camping alone plenty of times before, but this trip was different. I still have trouble putting it into words. All I know is that the silence stopped being my friend somewhere on the second day. I'd planned to be out there for 4 days, just long enough to clear my head and reset. The spot I'd picked was remote, a stretch of dense forest near Pagosa Springs that even the locals didn't visit often. It was perfect, or so I thought. The first day went like it always does. The drive up was uneventful, and after a few hours of hiking, I found the perfect campsite. It was tucked away by a creek, surrounded by towering pines, with a small clearing just big enough for my tent and fire pit. I felt that familiar rush of excitement as I set up camp, the freedom of being out here completely alone, with nothing but wilderness around me. That first night was easy. I sat by the fire, listening to the water rush over the rocks in the creek. I wrote in my journal a bit, mostly just notes about the hike and some thoughts about work. Then I crawled into my tent, ready to sleep. The silence was comforting at first, as it always is, but I woke up in the middle of the night to something strange. It was subtle, just a faint whispering sound, like the wind picking up through the trees. I brushed it off, telling myself it was nothing, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next day, things started to go wrong. I woke up later than I'd planned, the sky already a pale blue overhead. My stove was acting up, which was weird because it had worked fine the night before. It just wouldn't light, no matter what I tried. I ended up eating cold granola and packing up my camp, ready to move deeper into the forest. That's when I noticed my GPS wasn't working. I'd had reception when I camped here before, but now my phone was useless. No signal at all. I wasn't worried yet, though. I'd brought a map, and I knew the area well enough to navigate without technology. Still, the feeling that something wasn't right settled in, and I couldn't shake it. The hike was harder than I expected. My legs felt heavier, like the air itself was weighing me down, and the forest was quiet, too quiet. Normally, you'd hear birds or the occasional rustle of squirrels in the underbrush, but today it was just still. The silence felt unnatural. I found another campsite by late afternoon, a little farther into the woods, next to a meadow that looked untouched. I set up my tent quickly, eager to get a fire going, but as I worked, the feeling of being watched crept up on me. I couldn't shake it. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, nothing was there, just trees and shadows, but the sensation wouldn't leave. That night, I heard the whispers again. This time, they were louder, clearer, and they weren't random. They were saying something. My name. I sat up in my tent, my heart pounding. The sound was faint but unmistakable, that drifting on the breeze from somewhere just beyond the clearing. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and shone the light into the trees. Nothing. The forest was still, the fire flickering in the corner of my vision. I stood there for a long time, listening, but the whispering had stopped. It was just the wind. It had to be. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. By the third day, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept much the night before, and the feeling of unease had only grown stronger. My gear wasn't cooperating either. When I tried to pack up my tent, I found that the poles had bent. They were new, barely used, but somehow they were warped, like something had twisted them while I slept. It didn't make sense. The whispering was back too, even during the day. It followed me as I hiked, a faint sound on the edge of hearing, like someone walking just out of sight. I kept telling myself it was the wind, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I wasn't alone out here. Then there was the whistling. It started around midday, just after I'd set up my third camp. At first, I thought it was a bird, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. It came from somewhere deep in the woods, a high, clear note that echoed through the trees. I froze, listening. The sound grew louder, closer, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I called out, hoping it was another hiker, someone who'd stumbled across my camp, but there was no response, just silence. I tried to stay calm, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Now, it felt like something was circling me, just beyond my vision, waiting. That night, the whispers didn't stop. I lay in my tent, wide awake, listening as the sound of my name drifted through the trees. It was faint at first, like it had been the night before, but as the hours passed, it grew louder, more insistent. Dylan. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The fire had died down, casting long, flickering shadows across the clearing. I scanned the trees, heart racing, but there was nothing, just darkness. I was about to crawl back into my tent when I saw something move, a shadow slipping between the trees. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was too big to be an animal, and it was moving too deliberately, like it was watching me, waiting. I turned off my flashlight and backed into the tent, my mind racing. I'd never been this scared in the woods before, not once in all the years I'd camped alone. But now, there was something out there. I could feel it. I zipped the tent shut and tried to calm my breathing, but the whispers were inside my head now. They weren't just outside. They were all around me. Dylan, Dylan. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my tent, clutching the flashlight, listening as the whispers circled me. Sometimes it sounded like one voice, sometimes several, but it was always the same soft, insistent calling of my name. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get out of these woods. But as I started hiking, the whistling began again. This time, it was closer, following me like something was walking just behind me, whistling a slow, eerie tune. I didn't stop to look. I didn't want to see whatever it was. I just kept walking, faster and faster, until I was practically running down the trail. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I froze, heart pounding in my chest, and slowly turned around. There, standing just at the edge of the clearing, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were hollow and its lips were curled into a grin. It stood there, staring at me, its head cocked to the side as if amused. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The whistling had stopped, and now there was only silence. A silence so thick it pressed down on me like a weight. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but eventually I turned and ran. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs felt like they were going to burst. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead where my car was parked. When I finally looked back, the figure was gone. I never told anyone what happened in the San Juan National Forest. Not really. I tried to explain it to myself a 1,000 different ways. Exhaustion, anxiety, maybe even altitude sickness. But none of that explains the whispers or the whistling or the figure that watched me from the trees. I haven't been camping since.